ní àṣẹ ṣe àṣẹ ẹ pé kò ṣẹ àṣẹ ẹ máa pé kò ṣẹ àṣẹ ọdẹ roko ọdẹ pẹran ẹ̀rọ kí lọdẹ pa òní ọdẹ pẹran òkété àní ikú arẹwà kété òní àrùn arẹwà kété àní ọ̀fọ̀ arẹwà kété ẹ máa pé kò ṣẹ ọdẹ roko ọdẹ pẹran àní ẹran kí lọdẹ pa ó ṣe bí ọdẹ pẹran wá wá àní owó àwa wá wálé àní ọmọ àwa wá wálé àlàáfíà àwa wá wá o ẹ máa pé kò ṣẹ òní ẹ máa pé kò ṣẹ àṣẹ èyí àṣẹ lónìí àtùbà àtùṣẹ gbogbo tá a wá ṣe ajá síre ajá sáyọ̀ ire gbogbo fún gbogbo wa o. Everything we have come to do today will go in peace by the grace of the Almighty. I pray for every one of you. Àlàáfíà, ire, ayọ̀, ìdùnnú, ó dàbọ̀ o. Ó dàbí máyìlọ, omi lọ, mo bẹ̀ ìmọ̀. Ó dàbí máyìlọ, omi lọ, mo dẹ̀ ìmọ̀. Ó dàbí máyìlọ, omi lọ, mo dẹ̀ ìmọ̀. Ó dàbí máyìlọ, omi lọ, mo dẹ̀ ìmọ̀.
Good morning, everybody. And thank you to Abiola Dosun for that prayer, that everything we do today will go well. I'm here to welcome you to this auspicious occasion, which is celebrating the legacy of people of Nigerian descent in Britain. My name is Funmi Adewale Elliott, and I'm honored to be given this role as moderator today. When I looked at the title, it had the word celebration. And sometimes I remember thinking, why do Africans always celebrate and black people always celebrate, the Caribbeans always celebrate when we do an event? We call it a celebration of. And I used to think it was a trivial thing. And then I began to realize over time that to celebrate is to reflect, it's to come together, it's to recount, it's to think of strategies forward. It's to say, yes, we've reached a milestone. And I'm sure we're going to notice that when we encounter the talks of our speakers today. We have historians, we have artists, we have people that are looking at contemporary culture. And we're going to find moments where we're going to say, yes, we've reached a milestone here. What do we do next? How do we go forward? Let's celebrate what we've done. Let's celebrate what we're going to do. And this conference is the brainchild of Iroko's Theatre Arts. And I must say that I'm proud also to have done workshops with Alex Omapayos, who's one of my elders in the arts. And he's going to come out now and share a few words about this project. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks for that. I think we have a small request. I've just been told if it is possible, in terms of filming and photography, if it is possible for people to come, together. Please. So maybe if we use the front, the middle room. Yeah. Photographer, where are you? Maybe if you come and do this directly. Yeah.
Just to fill the space, because the space is all scattered.
Thank you. Right. first of all, I won't take your time. I just want to, thank you all for coming, because you are the brave ones, I would say. We have over 200 tickets. The event is completely overbooked, to be honest. 200 tickets, but you are the one who is here. So we thank you very much. Home from home. According to when we did the launch, Professor Kene, when he said the notion that home is somewhere else is wrong. That this is for us who call ourselves British Nigerians. Home is here, and it has got to be seen as that. And when we did a project about 4 years ago, which was called Speaking Without Voice, again funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund. During that project, we had a lot of encounter with a number of Nigerians, and what we kept hearing from them was how uncelebrated, the bad image that Nigeria is having, how it is affecting them. And we talk to young people who would not want to identify as Nigerians, young people who would actually prefer to change their name because they want to be seen to be Nigerian. And that gave me an idea of what could we do, In fact, that was the beginning. That was the beginning of the thought to put this project together. And we thank the Heritage Lottery Fund for enabling us, giving us the funding, to do this. And my sincere thanks to all the speakers who are here today. You will hear from them. I don't need to bore you, so you will hear from them the reason why this project is taking place. It is just to inspire conversation, because when we say we are celebrating Nigerians, there are thousands of Nigerians in this country. We cannot show, have a display of all of them. But the fact is that this should inspire conversation. There's a website for this project, and if you know of any individual that should be featured in that website, it is up to you. We rely on you to send us information. Please, this is just the beginning. Thank you very much.
We have a series of speakers today, and all of them eminent, and all of them who have done great things. If you look in your program, you'll find their biographies towards the back. Please read up on each person. I'm excited to introduce our first speaker, who's Professor Hakim Adi. I've seen this man's name on several pieces of paper over the years, and I had the honor of meeting him this morning. Please, Professor.
Okay, well, thank you so much for inviting me to this important gathering. I'm not really sure if this is the first gathering of this kind in this country, but anyway, it's an important one, I would say a historic one. How we see our history is very, very important. I say our history. Who we include, how we include, what the criteria are for inclusion. If we just look at the idea of celebrating Nigerians or British Nigerians, I see some people in the exhibition outside, I certainly wouldn't want to celebrate them. And I wonder what the criteria is for entry. I wonder who will be included in this website. I wonder if I will be included in this website, if I'm eminent enough to be included. So what I'm going to say today is to tell you something about the history of Nigerians in this country. I don't know whether it's a celebratory history. History is not always celebratory. History is there to teach us. We learn from history not to repeat the mistakes of the past. We learn our place in history. We learn the importance of struggle and it helps us to understand change and our role as change makers. And so I'm going to talk about some of those things and just something about the history of Nigerians in this country. Something, because I don't have very long. The history stretches back thousands of years, and I can't deal with all of that today. So let's have the first slide, if I can, please. I can't remember what the first slide is. What is it? Okay. Up, down, girl. So Up, Down, Girl is, of course, we can't see a picture of Up, Down, Girl because she died about 1,300 years ago. She was buried, she was about 10 years old. Her remains are found in a place not too far away from where I live in Kent. All the most important people are to be found in Kent, it appears. She died about 1,300 years ago, in the 7th century. But more recently, some DNA tests have been done on her skeleton to see what people could find out about her. And these days, DNA tests are very precise as to origins, national origins, and heritage, and so on. And her heritage is traced back to, of course, we can say Yoruba land, probably. Of course, Nigeria didn't exist 1,300 years ago. But she was of, we can say, most likely of Yoruba heritage. What is she doing in Kent? It's probably that she didn't come from Yoruba land. It's probably more likely that her grandfather came. Why did he come to England 1,300 years ago? What's the story? We don't quite know what the story is. It's just an example. We think we know something about the history of Nigerians in Britain. We don't really know very much. And the more that we investigate, the more we will find about this history. I'm going to leave it there just because of time. Let's go on to the next one and see what's the next one. Okay. So James Gronier, another person from what is today Nigeria, came from Bornu. And he's one of the first people to present an autobiography about his life. It's not quite an autobiography because he didn't write English as far as we know. I'm not saying he was illiterate, but we don't know that he was able to write. It was written for him, but it was based on his life story. I won't go into it now. You can find it online. You can read it for yourselves. He was from the royal family of Bornu, apparently, was kidnapped, enslaved, and so on and so forth. But it's actually a very historic publication. As you can see, published in Bath in 1772, thereabouts. Again, another very important figure, perhaps largely forgotten about today. Let's have the next one, please. So this is one of the most famous of the, we can say, Nigerians, if you want to use that word, of the 18th century, Olado Equiano. There's some controversy about him, which I won't go into today, but he's generally seen as being an Igbo, of Igbo descent. Most famous as, of course, a famous writer, best-selling author, political activist, one of the first, in fact, one of the first Nigerians, we can say, to use that word, to organize politically in this country. And he established the Sons of Africa, as the organization was called. He was also a member of the London Corresponding Society, one of the more radical political organizations of the day that was eventually banned by the government. So his writing is, excuse me, his writing is very, very important. He's one of the first people really to write as an African. You see, he calls himself the African. So we can say he's one of the first to develop that concept of being an African in the English language, and to write about Africa in a positive, you can say, celebratory way. If you read the first chapter of his book, which you can do, it's online, very easy to find, just Google it, you will see what he says. Okay, let's go on to the next one, because of time. Okay, well, Aina is probably more well known as Sarah Forbes Bonetta. She's interesting, partly because she wears very nice dresses that people like to look at in the photographs. She was an Egbado, kidnapped and taken to the kingdom of Dahomey. You probably know the story, where she was rescued, in inverted commas, by a man called Frederick Forbes, who brought her to Britain, where essentially she was adopted by Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria had a habit of adopting Africans, or kidnapped Africans, you can say. And she was educated at the Queen's expense, educated in Sierra Leone, but lived much of her life in this country, was married in Brighton, and so on. So, again, these are just examples. If we're looking for, I don't know whether there's contributions, but if we're looking for the history of Nigerians in this country, she, in fact, returned to Lagos. She married a Lagosian and lived unhappily, I think, generally, in Lagos, and died in Madeira, which is maybe a better place to die, I don't know. Or maybe she thought it was. Okay, let's move on. Okay, one of my favorites. This is the first person I ever really wrote about as a historian. The first article I had published was about this young gentleman. His name was Bandele Omoniyi. He was in this country round about 1908, something like that. He's interesting because, of course, there's a long history of Nigerians coming here as students, which predates him. But he's interesting in that he was a student activist, based mainly in Edinburgh, though he was also in Liverpool. And he's most noted for his publication of his book called A Defense of the Ethiopian Movement, one of the first Pan-African books ever to be written, which was published in Edinburgh at that time. He was a campaigner for the rights of Nigerians. He entered into correspondence with the Colonial Office, with the Colonial Secretary, with various politicians, including Keir Hardie, who has a kind of local connection with where we are now. He's MP for West Ham, I think. He has a very interesting life. He later went to Brazil and was imprisoned in Brazil. In fact, he died in Brazil at the age of 27, just after this, good-looking young man, just after this photo was taken. So a very, very interesting figure. I won't say any more about him now. Let's move on to the next one. Okay. Well, of course, there are many Africans, including Nigerians, who contributed to the First World War. I have to go from here to another place to talk about war. And one of the things that's important to remember about this war is that it was an unjust war. And although these days people like to celebrate Africans who took part in it, we have to bear in mind the nature of that war, first of all. But many of those who participated or were involved in the war were merchant seamen. You're aware that from the 19th century, many Nigerians, West Africans in general, were employed as seafarers, especially on out-of-Dempster lines, but also more widely. And during the First World War, some of those merchant ships were torpedoed. This is the crew of one of those ships. It calls the SS Apapa. And they were shipwrecked or torpedoed off the coast of Wales. Many of the crew were Nigerians who were killed in that. There are several of these incidents. And the graves of some of these people are still to be found in Wales. But this is just, I couldn't find, there are not that many photos, there are some photos. So these are some of the survivors from that particular ship. And of course, many participated in the war, not just from Britain, but also from Nigeria. And as you probably know, the First World War more or less started in Africa, and it ended in Africa as well. But that's for another time. Let's go on with the next one. Okay. Well, this is actually, I think, the first Nigerian organisation to be formed in this country, the Nigerian Progress Union, formed in London in 1924. It's a very interesting organisation in that it was co-founded by two people. The gentleman on the right, his name was Ladipo Solanke, a very famous Nigerian British personality. The woman in the centre is even more famous than him. Her name was Amy Ashwood Garvey. She was the first wife of Marcus Garvey, and she was the co-founder of the Nigerian Progress Union. What can we say about it? It was founded in West London. There's a lot of things we could say, but we'll move on because of time. Right, okay. So the Nigerian Progress Union gave rise to another organisation even more famous, the West African Students' Union, formed in London in 1925. And here you can see some of the members. This photo was actually taken from the 1930s, and it features Paul Robeson, the famous African-American actor, singer, communist, who was one of the patrons, and his wife, Islanda, who were the patrons, or two of the patrons of the West African Students' Union. This particular photo is taken from the first hostel that WASU set up in Camden Road, which is still there. And I think some of you will know the history of the West African Students' Union, but it was mainly organised, we could say it was dominated by Nigerians. Of course, there were people from, I have to say that, people from what is now Ghana, the Gold Coast. I'm not looking at anyone in particular, no, I'm not. As well as Gambia, Sierra Leone, and so on. It was, in fact, there were some problems within it because it was a bit too Nigerian at times, put it that way. But what is important about it is a very, very important organisation. One of the principles of that organisation was very, very interesting, that they fundraised in West Africa. So when they needed something, they always went back to Africa, they raised money. Sholinke actually toured West Africa for 3 years raising money. When he came back, they founded a hostel. I'll say more about the hostel in a minute. Yeah, let's go on to see what we got next. I've got a few. So here's another photo of him. This is a bit later. I think this was after a chieftaincy title was conferred on him in Nigeria, so this is probably 1940s. You can see he's got the WASU cap on. I can't remember what all the other things are significant as well, probably. Let's go on to the next one, just because of time. And this was one of the publications that they produced, this one from 1935. And you can see the bottom article, or bottom, yes, report of the WASU mission. So that's the fundraising mission that I referred to. What else have we got there? Well, you'll see, yes, the idea of WASU, what it actually means. They translated it in various ways, not only in Europe, but in nearly every West African language you could think of. It meant something in all of these languages. What else can we say about it? No, that would do, I think. I mean, this journal was first produced in 1926 and was still in existence in the 1950s, the late 1950s. So it's a very important organisation. Yeah, I mean, there's lots to be said. One thing to say about it is that although it was based in Britain, it established branches in West Africa, particularly Nigeria, but throughout the 4 British colonies. And so it actually led to we can say it was instrumental in the development of the anti-colonial movement in, let's just fix on Nigeria. So Nigerian youth movement, you can say, was assisted in its development by members of West African Students' Union. So WASU acted as a kind of training ground. People would come as students, they'd be educated, and then they'd go back and they'd be in the branches in Nigeria, and they'd do various things there and so on. And it worked the other way. If there was a problem in Lagos, they'd send a cable to London, and eventually they had their own parliamentary committee. So if something happened in Lagos, they'd send a telegram, this is going on, you need to raise it in Parliament. The parliamentary committee would take it, and then they'd raise a question in Parliament the next day. They were very, very highly organised. And Nigerians in Britain today could learn a lot from West African Students' Union. I'm not looking at anybody. Next one, please. Okay, so this is just to tell you something about history. You may not be interested in history, but I'm going to tell you anyway. When you're looking into the history of things, you never know where you're going to find information. So actually a lot of the information about WASU is actually at Unilag. The people at Unilag don't know it's there. It's probably all rotted by now anyway, because I looked at it about 30 years ago. Once I gave a talk at Unilag, and all the people in the talk said, "Where did you get this information from?" I said, "Well, it's downstairs." And so that should tell you something. Not that I'm criticizing anybody here who went to Unilag. Okay, so the point about this is, I actually found this in Washington, D.C. Just to tell you something about how research goes in history. You never know when you're going to find something. I was in D.C. looking at something else. I just thought, I've got a few minutes to spare. Let me just thumb through this guide to the archives. And suddenly I saw this item. That's very strange. Something about Wasu. And this was what it was. Now this is almost life-size. It's probably a little bit bigger, but not much. This was a poster. It was folded. It dates from about 1934. It looked as though it had never been opened when I opened it. It had been in Washington, D.C. since whenever, 1934, 1935. So you can see it's just a fascinating, I've never seen this anywhere else. I've not seen it in Nigeria, in Britain, anywhere. Anyway, you can see the places where the Wasu Journal could be bought, the Nigerian. And you can see a lot of the branches in Nigeria were actually based in schools, because it was the intellectuals of that period who were most interested in anti-colonial matters, politics and so on. Teachers and students. So they did a lot of work here. Anyway, just an interesting thing I thought I'd share with you. Let's go on, see what else we've got. So this is another picture of the West African Students' Union from the 1940s. This is at the new hostel, which is also in Camden and South Villas. One of my favorite photos from that period. Again, Wasu was still kind of Nigerian dominated in that period. It's just a beautiful photo. I'm just showing you because I like it. So let's go on the next one. Okay. So this is another famous Nigerian from that period, the 1940s, who came here, as many women did, to study medicine, either usually as nurses, one or two as doctors as well, during this period, during essentially the colonial period. Of course, one of the key features of colonial rule was it didn't educate anybody. And certainly there was no higher education provided. So people had to come here or go to the US, and many came here. So this is, she's known, I guess, as Nurse Ademola. She was one of the daughters of the Alake. But she's the more famous one, but her sister was also here trained as a nurse and midwife. She's become more well known because a film was made about her in 1944. Called Nurse Ademola. Unfortunately, that film has been lost. There are only two films made about Africans. There's a film called An African in London as well, and from the same period, that's also been lost. So we don't have the film, we just have some stills. There are about 6 stills of this film. It was essentially a propaganda film made during the war to be sent to the colonies to say that we're all pulling together. Here's an example. She trained, I think, at Guy's, as I remember. But I'm using this slide really just to emphasize that Nigerian women were coming here from that period and before the NHS was even founded. Sometimes you'll see online something about, actually I've forgotten her name there, it doesn't really matter. Some people claim that she was the first, Nigerian nurse or first African nurse or first black nurse in the NHS. I've forgotten her name, because whoever it's supposed to be, she wasn't. There were lots of people here in the 40s, in the 30s, and still, as you probably know, Nigerians are still being recruited to the NHS. Whether that's part of the brain drain or how one wants to see it, that's still going on. Okay, let's go on. Please. Okay, so one thing I haven't spent a lot of time on is talking about the kind of marriages and relationships which often develop during this period. Because although there were certainly Nigerian women here, there were certainly many more men than there were women. I've concentrated so far mainly on students, just because of the images that we have and the information that we have on students. But of course, many other people came here as workers, particularly as seafarers. And they tended to come to places like Liverpool, Manchester, Cardiff, London, as well as London, and all the port cities. And this is an example. This guy's name is Jide Johnson. This is at his wedding in Manchester. This is during the 1940s. I mean, Manchester is a very good example of a place that's very strong Nigerian history, just as Liverpool has, Cardiff, London, and so on. So these marriages or relationships were very, very common. And of course, they tended to produce children and so on and so forth. So many of the oldest, we can say, Nigerian communities, or if we want to call that, or black communities in this country are of this kind. This is the tradition. If we actually go back to the 18th century, time of Equiano, it was also the tradition then as well. So there's nothing new about it. These days, these families are very greatly celebrated. This photo actually comes from a project called Africa Solo, which was developed in Manchester. You can probably still find it online, which is the children very often talking about growing up in Manchester with Nigerian, not just Nigerian fathers, but West African fathers, but many of them were Nigerians. Talking about their fathers, talking about their mothers, talking about what it was like growing up in a Nigerian-headed household in Manchester in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. I know some people think Nigerians only came here in the 1980s or something like that. So this is, I'm not even going to talk about that. So this history is very important. It has actually quite a big impact on these cities, what life is like in these cities, like Liverpool, like Manchester, and of course like London as well. Let's go. See what else we've got. I can't remember what else I've got here. Okay, yes. So this is, this was organized by the West African Students' Union, but I just wanted to give you an idea because, again, people think this is a kind of new thing of people being concerned about what's going on in Nigeria. This is from 1945, and this is the famous general strike in Nigeria, which was a very, very important strike, in that it brought the country to a standstill and really kind of ushered in the kind of the mass anti-colonial movement, the struggle for independence from 1945 onwards. And it was a big deal here. This, as you can see, a meeting held in Red Lion Square to support the strikers and to support the strike and so on. And it's interesting what the demand was in those days. A minimum wage of 2 and 6. Some of you are too young to even remember what 2 and 6 was. But this is what people were demanding then. I don't know what people today are demanding in Nigeria as a minimum wage, and whether things have improved much or not. That's for another day. So this is another important event in 1945, the Manchester Pan-African Congress. I just wanted to show you, this is a very famous Pan-African event. If you look into the history of the African Union or whatever, anything, people always talk about this Congress. And of course, there were many Nigerians at it. Awolowo was one of those. Let's just go on to the next slide, I think, yeah. And this is Chief Shoyomi Koka, who was one of the leaders of the Nigerian TUC, who was here for that Congress. And of course, in the aftermath of the general strike. It was an interesting event because these trade union leaders were brought from Africa, essentially by the British government, to participate in the founding of the World Federation of Trade Unions, which was held in London and Paris in that year. And that's why this Congress was organized, because they were all present. So he was one of those Nigerians at the Congress. Awo was another, Jaji Awachukwu was another. There were many, many others, including those who lived in Manchester. So many of the Nigerians who participated in this important Congress were Manchester residents. They took place with their families, children, wives, and so on. So it was a Nigerian event as much as anybody else's event. Okay, let's see what's next. Okay, so in addition to the West African Students' Union, in the period after 1945, some of you may have heard the story that migration to Britain in that period was all about people who came on a particular ship that arrived in 1948 and all this kind of nonsense, which is an attempt to write a lot of people out of history, amongst other things, apart from a complete distortion of the facts. But actually, in this period after 1945, thousands of people came from West Africa, including from Nigeria, into this country as part of the changes that were going on in West Africa, largely to be trained as students, but a lot of people also came as stowaways on ships. And if you actually look at the papers of the times, like 1948, 1949, they're more concerned about people coming from Nigeria and other parts of West Africa than they are about people coming from the Caribbean, because actually more people, actually, in 1948, were coming from West Africa and Nigeria in particular than they were from the Caribbean. Because history has been distorted in such a way that most people wouldn't realize that. So as a consequence, you find many more organizations being formed in this period, including the Nigerian Union. Nigerian Union dates from about 1949. There was also a West African Women's Organization, a Nigerian Women's Organization formed during this period, early 1950s as well. So this is, well, you know who it is, but this is a meeting of the Nigerian Union, probably in the early 1950s. Yep, next please. Okay, so this is one of, I guess, the most interesting Nigerians of this period. This is, what should we say, this photo, it's not a great photo, from, I would say, the 1950s, possibly early 1960s. This is Obi Egbuna. Some of you may have heard of him. He's noted, I suppose, partly as an author and playwright, whose work was actually performed by the BBC at that time. And so this is how we have this particular photo of him. He has become more famous as a political activist during this period. He was one of the key members of the Committee of African Organizations, which you won't have heard of. It was one of the most important organizations of Africans in that period, also formed in 1959. You heard of the anti-apartheid movement? Oh, good. So the Committee of African Organizations formed the anti-apartheid movement. They led the founding of the anti-apartheid movement in this country. Now, Obi Egbuna was a member of COW, as it was known. COW was, for a time, headed by a Nigerian. I won't go into it now because it changed over time. But COW was a coalition of African organizations, about 14 different African organizations. Obi Egbuna was, for a time, the editor of its journal. Its journal was called United Africa, and was an important publication during the early 1960s. Then he became one of the leaders of the Black Power movement in this country. Now, usually when people talk about Black Power in the 1960s in Britain, other people's names are mentioned, and I won't go into now who they were. But Obi Egbuna is often left out. But he really was one of the leaders of the movement. He was a leader of the Universal Colored People's Association, which was set up in 1967. He chaired that. He wrote a book called Destroy the Temple, which you can still find, which is about the movement in Britain. And he was arrested for his activities, actually imprisoned for a while during the late 1960s. And then, anyway, he kind of, well, it's said, I'll tell you a story about him. I'm not sure how true this is. He was held in prison for a long time. I say a long time. He was held on remand, I think, for about 3 months in prison. And when he came out of prison, his case was held. His case was held in court and so on. And the story is that he employed white lawyers to represent him, and that kind of so undermined his credibility in the Black Power movement that his influence was lost subsequently. Anyway, that's the story. That's part of the story. There are other reasons, but that's part of the story. Okay, let's see what we've got next. Ah, yes. Yes. So this is, I'm sure that's a great picture, but this is Folarin Shylon, who some of you may have heard of. He was, amongst other things, he was Dean of Law at University of Ibadan, but he's important in Britain not as a lawyer. He was a very eminent lawyer, and you can read things about him. But in Britain, he's important not as a lawyer, but as a historian. He's one of our, obviously there's a tradition of Nigerian historians in this country, but he was probably the first great Nigerian historian. He wrote 2 important books. One's called Black People in Britain. The other one's called Black Slaves in Britain. They were both published in the 1970s. Difficult to find now. You can still maybe get a little bit expensive. But he was a very, very good historian. I don't know the full story of why he wrote these 2 very important books and then continued. He trained in this country as a lawyer and returned to Nigeria as a lawyer and as an academic. So I'm not quite sure what the story is about how he came to write these 2 books, but they're very, very good books, very good. Highly recommend them if you get the chance to read. So that is him. Okay, let's see what we've got next. Okay. So I thought, I'm not sure if this is the last slide or not. This is the last one. That means my amended presentation. Didn't read. So this, as you know, is Buchi Emecheta, and I guess the most probably still the most famous British Nigerian writer, whose books who obviously lived in this country for many years, probably for most of her adult life, and whose books are most well-known books are largely autobiographical, about being a Nigerian woman, married to a Nigerian man. You can say, not that there's anything wrong with Nigerian men. But I'd point that out from the way I said it. Yeah, what was her experience of living in Britain and the problems that she had? Obviously, people are aware of the difficulties she had. You know, she was married very young, she had children very young, she started writing to kind of escape from her marriage, and her husband destroyed her first manuscript. So her books narrate this experience, her experience, but also perhaps a more universal experience of Nigerian women in Britain at that time. So a very, very important writer. And yes, I mean, she was also quite a prolific writer. Of course, we have some very eminent writers with us today, so I don't want to take any of their glory away, but she was a very important figure. Now, I had one other slide that I forgot. I'm going to talk about it even though it's not here. This is quite a difficult thing to talk about without a slide. It's a difficult thing to talk about anyway, but it's a difficult thing to talk about without a slide. But I'm going to finish with this particular person, who is, I usually show a slide of my friend, I wouldn't say classmate, but friend, because we went to university together, Aji Lewis, and her son Shenny. That slide disappeared, unfortunately. But he is actually quite an important figure in our history. We could say the history of this country. People probably know the story of Shenny, who was admitted, he was a young man, 24 I think he was admitted to hospital in South London in 2010, and he was admitted as an outpatient to a hospital, and then he became unwell, distressed during his admission. The hospital staff felt they couldn't cope, whatever the circumstance, and they called the police to assist them. I think, I might get it slightly wrong, I think 11 or 12 police officers arrived, and they killed Shenny. So that is in essence the story. Of course, it's not in itself an unusual story or a rare story, as rare as we might want it to be. But Shenny's Aji and Conrad and the family have campaigned for many, many years, and they eventually had the law, I have to say no police officers, as very often the case, no police officers were held to account for his death. Nobody has been held accountable for his death. But they campaigned for many years, were able to get a law changed to protect people in those circumstances of vulnerability. I can't remember the whole name of the law. It's to do with, medical institutions relating to mental health or whatever, to do with mental health and medical institutions. But it's known as Shenny's law. And so even in his passing, he has made a significant, important contribution. And it's a reminder that although we often think in terms of celebrating, we have to understand the context of the history that we're dealing with. That in history, things are not everything is positive in all its characteristics. There are many difficult things which Nigerians as well as others have had to deal with in this country. And we have to recognize them all, appreciate them all, understand them all, learn from them all, so that we take something from this history to go forward and to be able to advance in the future. And of course, it's always that advance which is important. And I think one of the key things that history teaches us, and some of it I've alluded to in what I said today, is that the importance of people's unity, of people working together for the advancement of all. I'm not going to go back, well actually I'm going to go back to the exhibition outside. So we have some people in that exhibition who don't do that. actually they're not interested in the advancement of Nigerians or the advancement of anybody much, but perhaps apart from themselves. And so I think we should learn from our history. Who are those Nigerians who are important to us? Not necessarily those who have high office or got a lot of money or are very prominent, but what have they done for Nigerians? What have they done for us? What have they done for this country, if you like? What have they done for other Africans here? These are the kind of questions and criteria that I think are important. So there's no shortage of Nigerians here. There's loads of Nigerians here. But people who have actually done something that we can say, yes, we can be proud of this. They've done something for us. They've contributed something positive, something to advance. This is, to me, very, very important. And as you know, anyway, I won't say anything about Nigeria, but there's too much reverence, let's say that, for big people. History is not really about big people. History is actually about so-called small people. Because it's the people that we don't know about who actually make change. If we go back to just go back to the general strike in 1945, who participated in that? You don't know. I just point to one person who was the leader of the TUC in that period. But that was made up of thousands, tens of thousands of men, women, children, young people. We brought the country to a standstill. Because, as everybody knows, the most important people in any country are those who do all the work. And the same is true in Nigeria today. People who are important are the millions of people who work every day. Not the millionaires and billionaires. They're not important. So I think, as I said, when we're thinking about who we want to celebrate, then it's important to bear these kind of questions in mind. That's it.
Thank you very much, Professor Aki, for that very enlightening talk. We can now take one or two questions for the Q&A before we move to the next speaker. Could we start with this gentleman and this gentleman? Could someone take a microphone? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure if it's on, but I can. Thank you. That was quite interesting, and also because I learned from that. I came in the 80s, and I know you didn't want to mention anything about the 80s, so I just wanted to explore why you didn't want to touch on Nigerians who came in the 80s.
Well, it's nothing personal. The thing is that the more recent period is more well known. So people have personal experience. Probably many people in this room have had personal experience. So when deciding what I was going to do, I said, let me talk about things that you may not know about. Because a lot of people, not you personally, a lot of people who came in the 80s think, oh, I came in the 80s. Like it was, you know, something like prehistory. I was well, like a pioneer. I came in the 80s. Because obviously people have come in the 21st century. So there's this tendency to think that, you know, everything started in the 80s. Well, everything didn't start in the 80s. You know, people came in the 70s, in the 60s, in the 50s, in the 40s, in the 19th century, in the 18th century, in the 7th century. So we have to have an appreciation of all of it, because otherwise, again, there's a kind of distortion of things. We don't really understand. You know, my father came in the 50s. And so, you know, let's actually understand history. Then we can, you know, we have a greater appreciation of what it is we're talking about, what it is we're drawing on. Because we have all these memories. We have all these memories. We understand that, you know, for example, I don't know whether it's true. I remember talking to Miss Ola, as she was known, Mama was many years ago. She said, okay, when we came in the 1930s, we wanted to eat whatever we wanted to eat, hamala, whatever it was. But we couldn't find this, we couldn't find that. So we used to import some things. She said, you know, my mother would pack all these things and send them to Tilbury and so on and so forth. But she said we found some local things that we could use. So one of those things was ground rice. I think also semolina as well. So these traditions, these ideas, these things which make up you know, what people think of as aspects of Nigerian culture in this country, they're not necessarily recent things. They go back a long, long time, maybe 100 years or more. So it's important that when we understand the world in which we live, we try and understand all of it. If we only understand a part of it, we kind of get a distorted picture of things. And there may be very important things that we don't understand. To give you another example, I said Alado Equiano was we can say he was an early Pan-Africanist. He actually formed an African organization. But he was also involved in a British organization at the same time. So why was he involved in both of these organizations? Well, maybe he understood something about the way that politics works. In fact, the organization he belonged to had a very interesting political philosophy. They said, if you're interested in the rights of black people, you must be also interested in the rights of white people. If you're interested in the rights of white people, you must also be interested in the rights of black people. In other words, you need to be interested in the rights of all. So we're in the 21st century, a lot of people don't understand that politics. They haven't even got to that level. That's where they were, where Equiano and others were in the 18th century. So when we study history, we learn these things. And hopefully through learning them, we can also emulate them. And not also emulate the mistakes of the past, but the positive things. So looking at some of this history, I had 45 minutes. Couldn't talk about it. So I decided that's what.
So thank you very much for your talk, which was fascinating. I've also got a question like the previous gentleman that goes beyond your talk, and I don't know if you feel you're able to answer it, but I'm interested in how you would contrast the migrant movement here in the UK, comparing West Africans with East Africans, because East Africans, Kenyans, Tanzanians, Ugandans, have quite a different profile in this country, in my view, because of pre-colonial or colonial or post-colonial history, and a number of facts. I'd just be interested whether you have a view on that in terms of your Pan-African experience.
Well, I think the main difference is that historically there were many more people here from West Africa than there were from East Africa. That's one of the differences. If we go back to, and that's to do with the connections which existed with West Africa, obviously during the times of the 18th century, even 17th century, 18th century, there was a different connection with West Africa, particularly because of human trafficking, essentially. That's the difference. I mean, there are images which I didn't bring today because they're not strictly Nigerian. But I mean, we do have not a lot of, but I mean, there are a lot of examples of West Africans being here, connections being established between Britain and West Africa, particularly the rulers of various West African states. There's a long tradition of people sending their kids to be educated here. particularly their sons, to be educated. Even going back to Elizabethan times, that happened. So that didn't happen with East Africans. So the relationship with East Africa is fewer and newer, generally speaking, we could say. And so that's a different tradition. And then, yeah, there are different connections. So we have communities here today from quite big communities from Ethiopia, Eritrea, and so on, which have no particular historical connection, colonial connection. Obviously, there are people here from Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, but the traditions are different. The colonial traditions are different. The traditions of people coming to this country. Obviously, there were some people like Kenyatta was here from the 1920s. One or two others were here. People were here from Hastings Banda was here. One or two people who were here. But the West Africans were dominant in terms of numbers and so on. So that, briefly, that's how I deal with that.
Unfortunately, we can't take any more questions. It's just the fact that we started late and we've gone over time. But I would like to encourage people to write their questions on a sheet of paper. Not because I'm going to send it to Professor Hakim, but because I'm going to, you can address them. Yes, please.
Well, you can, yeah, I mean, you can send them. Maybe I can answer them in a video or something quickly. That's probably the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, but I would definitely.
Or read my book.
But
African and Caribbean People in Britain, A History. Published by Penguin.
But I would definitely.
Shortlisted for the Wolfson History Prize.
Two more questions. Great. I think Lekia asked, and then the lady over there. And if you do have a question, please write it down, because I'll make sure Iroko Theatre get it. You never know, it might spurn another event. So Lekia, your question. Please.
Thanks very much. Thank you for such a brilliant presentation. I just wanted to ask this question because you mentioned about a particular boat that came in, or ship that came in at a particular time, and how the focus is all on that. Actually, just 2 days ago, someone told me about another ship that came in with Africans, and it was called MV Oriel. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it properly. So I just wanted to know if you know anything about that. If you can enlighten us a bit more about that.
I can't remember that, but I mean, the ships are coming in all the time. Yeah. You know, the Elder Dempster Line was established in the 19th century. People were coming in all the time. That is why we have these communities of people in Liverpool, in Manchester, in other places. In the 1940s also, many ships came in. You know, being fixated on a particular ship in a particular year is a nonsense. You know, even if one looks at people who came from the Caribbean, lots of ships. There were ships that came in 1947, 1946, and so on. So this is rubbish. It's just complete nonsense. And it's used to symbolize something that didn't even happen until the next decade. Large numbers of people from the Caribbean did not come to this country in the 1940s. You know, there were probably as many, I don't necessarily have all the figures, but as I said, if you look at the newspapers of the day, they're talking about West Africans. This person stowed away. This person stowed away. Or this person came and look, they're studying in West Bromwich and look what they're doing, and they're Nigerian and they came from Lagos and this and that. These are what the papers are about. So this ship in 1948 is a myth. It's a distortion. It's, you know, I read something the other day, people saying that they were invited to come. It's rubbish. Nobody invited anybody to come in 1948. It's complete rubbish. But it's been, you know, once the government starts saying it, you know it's got to be a lie. You know it is. You know, to have a day, it excludes everybody from the African continent. And those of us who draw our heritage from the African continent are the majority. People from the African continent are the majority black population in this country. people from the Caribbean are a minority. It's not, you know, I'm not being hostile. It's just a question of fact. So why distort the fact? You know, so anyway, if you read my book, I call it the myth of the whatever it's called, that shit. I don't even want to talk about it because it's why do you want to keep talking, you know, saying these things which are not true? It's bad enough. I have people attacking me on YouTube for talking about the Africans here in Roman Britain. Yes. Oh yes. All the time. People attack me. It's just for, you know, for telling the truth about this history. So then to have other people going around spreading lies and myths and all this kind of things, it's just ridiculous. Anyway, that's enough on that.
Can we have the next question?
Well, no, just to reiterate the thanks for the talk, I just couldn't agree more about tracing the history and going beyond the kind of modern period. Just a great talk, so thank you so very much. I just wanted to ask about your thoughts, kind of looking forward when you look at Nigeria today. Are there any elements that kind of give you hope in terms of progression and sort of Nigeria's, I guess, present and future?
Nigeria, did you say?
Yeah.
You mean Nigeria in Nigeria?
Nigeria. Yeah.
Let me just say one other thing before I talk about Nigeria. Let me just say about Nigerians in Britain. One of the important things is we don't actually, to be honest, we don't celebrate our history. You know? There's a lot of people my age, but well, actually maybe I'm quite old now, but anyway, maybe not my age. But anyway, there's quite a few elders in this room. So what is their story? Do we sit down and talk to our parents, our grandparents, our elders? These people have been here from time, from the 50s, well, you know, still around, or, you know, from the 50s, from the 40s. But people don't talk to them, or people are just beginning to talk to them. There's even people here from the 80s. Too long time ago. So there's this history. I mean, for young people, 80s is a long time ago, you know, because it's whatever it is, 45 years ago or something, or yeah, nearly 50 years ago. Recording this history is important, and there are so many institutions who could help. You know, everybody, I don't know, people religiously go to church and so on. But the churches could actually do something more useful, let's say, in recording things, asking people to preserve photos, taking an interest in things. Photos are very important. You know, what was it like in the 70s? What was it like in the 60s? What photos do we have? It's just basic things. So we need to understand the importance of these things and do something about it. And again, I mean, Nigeria, you see, there are so many things that you know, one can say. One thing I will say is that we have, one of the things I think which is problematic is there's too much deference. I'm going to be frank, there's too much deference. You know, let us, okay, one doesn't want to, okay, there's things that are important. You know, you value, you know, your elders for what they can, for their wisdom, for their life, and so on and so forth. However, there's this deference to not only age, but to wealth, to title, to all of these things, which are useless, particularly to wealth. And, you know, we have to understand something about wealth. Wealth is not created by rich people. Wealth is created by poor people. So if you want to defer to that, then you should defer to the poor, to the workers. say these are the important people. Anyway, that's one issue, but I mean, I'm being a little bit, you know, tongue-in-cheek. That is an issue, but obviously the issues are much greater than that. But if you just come down to the issue of wealth, look at the wealth that this country has. It's so much wealth. Whether you say it's the biggest economy or second biggest economy in Africa, whatever. Look at what it has, the possibilities, the potential, the everything, the resources. But these criminals are ruining the place, have ruined it. You know, people were sending me things, you know, whenever it was last week, happy. I said, what are you talking about? What is it you're celebrating in that sense?
Is there hope in the youth, perhaps?
There's always hope in the youth. There's hope in the wealth producers and the working people, always. But people have to realize that, yes, we are the ones who create that wealth. We must control it. We must control it. We must have that thinking that we are important. Just like in 1945, to have a general strike, I'm not saying there's only been one general strike, but that sense of empowerment. Let us take control of our country and build it in the way that we want to build it, so it satisfies the majority of people. How can you have one of the biggest economies in Africa and cannot provide water? It cannot provide electricity. It cannot provide kerosene. This is disgusting. That is, you know, to have people parading around as politicians, and they cannot solve these simple problems, let alone sewerage, which I would say is the other key. With so much wealth, people who you can't even use that wealth, but people have private. How many cars can you drive? How many houses can you do? But it's perpetuated. Even here, we have to be careful. You know, the money that people spend on rubbish. Yes, of course. Anyway, I'm not going to go into it. But how do we use these things to advance everybody? Yes, of course I can have a party and I can invite 200 people and it can cost me £20,000. Yes, of course, that's not a bad thing, to entertain your friends and so on. But are there other things that we could do that might improve things for everybody? So I think to learn from this history, to, as I say, have less reverence for these crooks. Reverence for crooks is no. Because somebody has a title, no. What are they doing to advance things? These, I think, are crucial things. But that's a very, very big question, which, anyway, maybe we should talk about it every time we meet. Because, just to go back to this history of the Nigerian Progress Union, West African Students Union, and others, they had two main aims, essentially. I know. One was how to look after Nigerians or West Africans in this country. That was one. The second was how to advance Nigeria. What can we do? How can we wrest it back from the colonial rulers? Our situation isn't very different now.
Thank you for such a important session. And Prof said something about keeping images and photographs, and therefore it's nice to know that our next speaker is an image activist. So I want to invite forward Becky Ali.
I'm going to stay behind the podium. Well, good afternoon. We're a little bit behind time, but hopefully, this is a short presentation, so I hope you'll enjoy it. As much as I enjoyed researching it, well, kind of enjoyed. It was still very late at night. Have you got... Yeah, so there's a video I actually wanted to show you. It was a viral video on TikTok and Instagram, but I don't know if we have it. I'll just try and explain it, though if we don't. Hold on, let me just double check. Anyway, so I was, someone sent me this video while I was scrolling as you do, when you have a lot to do, you're looking at Instagram anyway. And it was a young American white girl, and she was fascinated with the discovery that her hair grew from her scalp. And she was thinking that her hair actually grew from, that her hair actually grew from the ends, you know. She was wondering, is there hair in my forehead or something like that? But anyway, I just wanted to show you that, to show that sometimes there's some simple things that we don't really tend to understand. So anyway, unlike that American young lady, I'm sure that all of us here understand the biology of hair, and we know that it grows from our scalp, and maybe also we understand its biological functions as well. Because there's so much more to hair than it protecting our scalp. But even that alone is a very important function. Actually, it's one of the reasons why we have our large brains. Thanks partly to the protection our hair gave our ancestors from the scorching sun of Africa, our brains could develop and grow big into this complex organ it is today. This complex organ that is helping us create technology and society. And society is all about what we as human beings have created, is giving us meaning to what it is to be human. And this is where heritage comes in, because it is our humanness that creates the heritage. But firstly, what is heritage and how is hair part of this heritage? According to the Cambridge Dictionary, heritage is history, traditions, practices, languages, and I'm stressing on the language, which I would, make you understand why I'm doing that in a minute, and other features of a particular country or society that exists from the past and continue to be important. So I stressed on language. We know that language is used to communicate. When you want to, get to know someone, or someone wants to get to know you, you speak to them. The interesting thing is that hair is language, because it communicates to us. It tells us about someone's status in their society, someone's age group, marital status, mental state, beliefs, religious affiliations, even gender. Sometimes guys have different hairstyles from girls, and it's all mixed now, but you get the picture. And hair has been used to communicate in every culture, in almost every era in history. If not every era, actually. I can't really think of any time in history that hair hasn't been used to communicate. Hair has been used to oppress people. For example, you think of prisoners, when they're taken like prisoners of war, their hair is shaved. Back in the 18th century, late 19th century actually, when women want to be disgraced, here in France, for example, and even here in In the UK, their hair was shaved. In China, anywhere in the world, hair has always been used to either communicate, to oppress, or to uplift. So it's the same thing when it comes to Nigeria. Hair has always had a deeper social meaning than just the pure artistry and the aesthetics that we, attribute to it. It's a combination of creativity and communication. And so now, the first slide, which you've already seen anyway. So I'm sure, you saw a bit of it. That was from the early 20th century. That was the hairstyle of, go to the first one. Present. Okay. Yeah. But click on present. There. So this is the hairstyle of what, the first one here, the first image is present day Anambra State, which is around 1911, and that's the hairstyle. I've actually done that hairstyle before. So, and the one in the middle too as well is another Igbo woman. I really don't, I've been looking at that image trying to understand what she did. Is it locks? How did she make it up that? But it's really, it's interesting and it's beautiful. I don't really know the meanings of these ones, but they all communicated something at the time, as well as the lady at the end. Can we go to the next slide? Slide number 2. These are actually men too as well. You can see the elaborate hairstyles on them. It's, it wasn't a situation of just shaving the head and all of that. They actually had some real intricate hairstyles. The one in the middle too also resembles locks, and then is made up like into a pyramid or something like that at the top of his head. Next slide. This is a little bit more recent from what was just shown. Now, I'm not Yoruba, so if I butcher the name, please do pardon me. And someone can shout out the actual correct pronunciation. But this one is called Kojushoku. Did I butcher it? Shoko, sorry, oh. Hey. It's the 1980s guy that's telling me. Okay, let me give you the mic. Can you tell me what it is then? Kojusoko. Isn't that what I said? Kojusoko. Okay. Anyway, you understood me. Great. Yes. And I'm sure you know that those of you that are Yoruba, you know the meaning of it. Thank you. Yes, faithful husband. So I have. Ikpakolede. See, I have some historians here. Anyway, going forward, what's the next one? The next slide. Okay, does anyone know what this one is then? Yes? Koroba? Yes. So you can see the style is more like, what we would call cornrows today. Back then in the 70s, in Nigeria, Didi, the one in the middle is Didi, where the plaiting goes on inside, underneath. Today they call it inverted cornrows. And these are different ways in which you can do it. Back then in the 70s, and I think in the 80s as well, we weren't calling it cornrows because that is something that's come from the Caribbean. We were actually saying weaving, you weave your hair, because that's just the way baskets was weaved as well. But now weave has taken a different connotation. So, so yeah, that's one. Let's go to the next one. And so this is kind of like a modification of the shuku. I got that one. I'm proud of myself. Yeah, so this is a modification of the shuku where it's just, again, weaved or cornrow right to the top, and then you have, that there on top. So this is some of the beautiful styles as well. We'll go to a next slide. Now, this is one of my favorites actually. Let me introduce you to the threading. In the Igbo land, it's called Ishi-owu. Yoruba people call it Irunkiko. Irunkiko. I kind of, yes, with thread. So in other parts of Nigeria, it's called different things as well. But to use English, you just say threading. So you go to the market and you just say, I want to thread my hair. And then, they get the thread and they, create so many different wonderful, beautiful styles with it. They all have different names. Things like, my husband follow me was one of the was one of the name of the styles. I remember my mom telling me about that. I was like, I'm not going to do that one. Nowadays, people talk about threading in terms of stretching, they say, use African threading to stretch your hair. But we were not using it for that at that time. This was more like in the 60s, mainly 60s, 70s. We're using it to create beautiful head styles. Let me see. So, and since we're talking about threading and beautiful styles of the 60s and 70s, can we go to the next slide? Yes, we cannot fail to mention the great photographer, J.D. Okai Ojiekere. So he's a renowned photographer. He captured many different traditional hairstyles after colonization. It was important for him, he said, because, when colonization came, and messed up our minds and made us believe that our hair wasn't good enough and that the hairstyles we did wasn't professional or wasn't what educated people wore. There was some, I think this was, I'm not too sure, but I think it was part of the revival, part of what was going on in America at the time, the 60s of the, the civil rights movement, and where they were like, black is proud, and black and proud rather. And so they were like, well, we've got ours already. And so they created so many, like, there are hundreds and hundreds of different styles. Actually, the one right at the end, I can remember having that done as a child, my hair and my mom as well. So he's taken hundreds of pictures. If you Google him, you can find some of his work. His work has been exhibited all around the world, including Tate here. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this is very interesting. I don't know if anyone remembers, look, we're very proud of our age, so, aging is a privilege, right? So if you recognize this, let me know by show of hands. Oh, wow, yeah, quite a few people, thank you. Yes, so this is the kind of boards that you would see in special parts in the market where women are there, make hair, and also in barbershop as well. These are the, beautiful artistic work, I would say, with both the drawing and the hairstyles as well. So you can see the one at the end. Those are different ways in which you can do the threading, and the one in the middle too. These are the, cornrows, just to use the modern term. And next slide, please. Now, bringing it a bit forward, as of from about 2010, there has now been a movement, what some people are calling the natural hair movement, where women are now, or black women are now going back to the kind of hairstyles that represented our culture, that represented where we were from, represented our heritage. And so this is the modern take of the threading. I'm not seeing much of it now, but I think it would be one of the things that would, really come back. I actually wanted to have my hair done, but I really didn't have the time, so maybe. Pardon? We have to make time. Actually, talking about time, when you look at all the intricate hairstyles from the first slide, which was like early 20th century till now, well, not till now, but, till the 70s, it gives you an idea of the kind of lifestyle that the people lived. So if you have to have time to create those intricate styles, learn about them, create them, you have to have what today we'll call work-life balance. It's all about having time to work and then having time to enjoy other things of life, like, having your hair done by a specialist or by your family. With the advent of colonization and unfortunately capitalism, that idea was now seen as something that was what lazy people did. And so we're called lazy, and we were made to work over and over and over, from hour to hour. And now in this sort of almost, should I say, tradition where we are not appreciating the time that we have to give to ourselves to look after ourselves and to nourish our hair. So hopefully we're going to learn from the past, which is what history is all about, which is what celebrating our history is all about, how we can balance these things and also celebrate our culture at the same time. I think I have another slide. Yes. And that again is also some modern take of the Irunkiko or threading. The lovely one there in the middle is me. That is what we would call some gaps. So it's still the threading, but you don't cover the whole hair like you see the singer there or Chimamanda over there. You don't cover the whole hair, you just cover some part of the hair. And that's called sun gas. Actually, when I was much younger, I used to think they called it sun gas because I used to hear people saying that. I didn't really understand, but it's actually called sun gaps. And also, talking about our culture and our heritage and hair, it's not just about what we did on the hair, but it's also the things that came along with it, like the combs, for example. These are some of the combs that our ancestors created when it came to looking after the hair. Sometimes it was just used as an accessory in the hair. They put it in the hair, and then also it was used in, combing out the hair, making out the straight lines, and all of that. So I didn't have time to get, and again, because I know the presentation is going to be a really short one. So there are other things too, like the cowrie shells, the beads, and all the different wonderful, beautiful things they put in their hair to show their status, their age. I remember even the shuku that you did, it was actually a recommended hairstyle for children in school at the time. So, in conclusion, as we have seen, I need to go by my script because I tend to always go off tangent. My niece is somewhere in the crowd. She will tell you how I start talking about maybe bread and somehow end up politics of America. I don't know. Anyway, so as we have seen, hair holds significant social and cultural implications across different societies, including Nigeria, of course, and it's reflecting its symbolic and practical importance in shaping human identity. From its historical significance as a marker of social status to its role in religious practices and personal style, hair remains powerful as a means of communication and self-expression. As societal norms and cultural trends continue to shift, the role of hair in modern society is also evolving, with new meanings and trends emerging. But one thing remains the same: hair communicates. Overall, the many meanings of hair reflect the complexity and diversity of human identity and highlight the importance of respecting and celebrating individuality and cultural heritage. To celebrate our hairstyles is to celebrate our culture. To celebrate our culture is to celebrate our heritage. Thank you.
Does anyone have a question for Ahmed? Could you please, the gentleman on the second? A quick question. Then you want there. Yeah.
This on? Mine isn't a question, it's a comment.
Okay.
From your presentation, I sit here and I'm thinking, it seems everything communicates to us, African tradition, because I've never thought of hair as something that communicates. But I know fabric does, and the symbols. And when you said something about husband, follow me, I thought to myself, even in clothes, African fabrics,
Yeah.
I remember my grandmother saying something about, you can insult someone despite the pattern of the fabric that you're wearing.
Very true.
You can, there's one that says, Ujamia, Menyabo. It's the Ghanaian language. If you divorce me, I'm not going to eat stones. Thanks for that.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much for that, because that happens with clothes as well, with materials. I mean, we've lost some of those meanings, but they're really very interesting. And it's actually something that I'm thinking of looking into. And is anybody, I think it's very interesting. But yeah, thanks very much for that contribution.
We have one more question.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, so Lekia, my question is to do with the plaiting of hair and the fact that, well, I remember plaiting of hair, well, my grandmother in particular, always having her hair plaited. But in England of like the 1980s and beyond, it seems to have been claimed as a masculine thing. Any comments about that?
Plaiting hair as masculine?
Yes.
Like oh.
In schools, the kids, you don't see girls like with their hair plaited.
Oh.
It tends to be boys.
Interesting, yeah. That's quite interesting. It's actually the answer I would give to that question is not a very short one, but I'll try and make it short. Well, first it's because the plaiting, it's easier or better done with Afro-textured hair. But we moved away from Afro-textured hair, or female moved away. The idea of femininity was seen through the Western eyes, and that was long flowing hair. So that's what we were gravitating towards. For men, it wasn't so much so. So men were, in a sense, allowed to still have their natural hair. So they have, experimented with it, they've plaited it, they've done, twist and locks, and it's more like it's acceptable for men to have their traditional, natural hair, and because of that, it's easier for them to have traditional hairstyles. So that would be my short answer. But we can talk about that later.
I know Shango cuts the hair. For our boys, it's a thing of strength and power. That's why they still do that now. Like you mentioned, the ladies have moved away from that because of colonial. But for the men, it's more something of power and strength. Apologies for intrigue.
Just to add to that, sir. The Yoruba man says, Iroko kuni bere wo.
We have to understand that the meaning of hair differs from culture to culture and from tradition to tradition.
Yes.
And this whole organization is very interesting. This soothing home from home. Yoruba man says, "Bi ode odun, bi igbe nilu ri." If your home is not sweet, if you don't understand the education of self, you will be mixed up in whatever interpretation you want to give to hair or things. The Yoruba man says, if you have hair, lots of it, the bushy hair is the beginning of madness.
Yeah.
But in addition, they put a clause too. I told you,
sorry, translate.
If you don't take care of the hair, then it's the end of madness.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why you get different styles of hair made, because Africans take care of their hair so that they are not called mad people.
Yeah. I mean, when a woman is mourning, I know this is a lot in southern parts of Nigeria, you don't comb your hair. You can wash it, but you don't comb it. Could be for 6 months, 3 months, or even a year. You go without combing your hair to show that you're mourning. So, yeah, again, it's all about meaning. Sorry.
There's a lot of interest in this in this talk, but we've run out of time. Can you please give? And thank you, Lekia, for taking the time to compile that information. It is funny, but it's also generational. There's some dances, for example, that started off as female dances and are now male dances, like the Saba dance in Senegal. It originally was a female dance. Women still dance it, but now, majority of the men people that you see taking the dance around are male. And sometimes generationally, things shift for various reasons, which unfortunately we don't have time to all discuss. But let's move on. So our next speaker is going to talk about art. And we have with us today Hassan Aliyu, FRCSA, President of the Nigerian Art Society. Please come forward. Thank you.
I was on the verge of saying that I wasn't going to take any questions because my question on hair wasn't taken. But I'm sure I'll have the opportunity to ask it privately because there's a really interesting one about Jerry Coles. Okay. But thank you very much, and it's really a pleasure to be here to talk about the immense and the massive contribution of Nigerian artists to the vibrant tapestry of British art and culture. In this realm of artistic innovation, where Britain stands at the forefront of cutting-edge practices, Nigeria proudly occupies a distinguished place. And I'll accompany these insights with captivating slides showcasing the brilliance of Nigerian artists, what they bring to the British cultural landscape. So that's the first slide. But on the second slide, please. Right, okay, it's probably a very huge file size. Anyway, so for a brief introduction about me, my name is Hassan Aliyu. I'm an artist and currently serving as the president of the Nigerian Art Society UK. I was born in London nearly 60 years ago. My parents arrived in the UK as British citizens just before Nigeria gained its independence in October 1960. They would be considered as part of the Windrush generation, even though they did not arrive on HMT Empire Windrush. My mother, still a teenager at the time, journeyed here via British Overseas Airways Caledonian, BOAC, while my father came by sea aboard the MT Oriole, which was mentioned earlier in Hakim's presentation. In the years that followed, my family confronted eviction from our bedsit in Finchley in London on the very day that they brought their newborn twins, my sister and myself, home from the maternity ward. These occurred during the time when rental ads displayed the infamous notice, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs, and certainly no children. Faced with the immense challenges of hardship and homelessness, they were forced to make the heart-wrenching decision to send us to Nigeria, where my grandparents would provide care and shelter. But this narrative is not uncommon amongst young Nigerian people who came here just before or soon after independence in Nigeria. So there's nothing unique about my story. But for me today as an artist, that story forms the basis of my art practice. So my lived experience is the basis of the art that I make using recyclable materials, and I make very large paintings that critique slavery, colonialism, and anti-black violence, and that's one of my pieces. The piece in the background is titled Escaping Hellfire. The title is derived from a book based on religious faith, which was presented to me as the greatest gift that my sister-in-law would give to me. And eventually I found that it made really good use as material. Next slide. So I would like to acknowledge the contributions of substantial accomplishments of renowned Nigerian curators whose work has contributed to projecting Nigeria's art internationally. And the list is lengthy, but there's special mention to people like Okwe Enwezo. Okwe Enwezo was a highly accomplished Nigerian curator, art critic and writer, as well as editor of NK magazine and several other titles. He made significant contributions to the world of contemporary art and culture. Some of his notable accomplishments being the following. He served as artistic director of the 56th Venice Biennale in 2015. The Venice Biennale, for those who know or don't know, is one of the biggest art exhibitions in the world. It happens every 2 years in Venice, in Italy. He curated Documenta 11, again one of the biggest exhibitions that happens in Kassel in Germany. He curated Documenta 11 in 2002. And this exhibition, held every 5 years in Kassel, showcased a wide range of artists from various regions and backgrounds, emphasizing diversity and inclusivity. Okwenwezo was a prolific writer, art critic, contributed to numerous publications and journals. His writings often explored themes related to globalization, post-colonialism, and intersection of art and politics. Enwezo served as director of Haus der Kunst in Munich, in Germany, from 2011 to 2018, just before he passed. Under his leadership, his institution gained international recognition for its exhibitions and programming. Notable amongst these was the solo exhibition of El Anatsui, which was one of the projects he did just before he died. Okwenwezo's work and contributions expanded the horizons of contemporary art, encouraged cross-cultural dialogue, and advocated for a more inclusive and global perspective in the art. The reason why I've included Okwenwezo, even though he wasn't a British-based curator, is that the global perception and the regard for Nigerian art was, highly, as a result of his work, Nigerian art became, really of noteworthy mention in the international art context. So next slide, please. I'd also like to acknowledge B.C. Silva. B.C. lived and worked and studied in London before she went back to Nigeria, from where she projected a very global, international art curating image. It became very well known and again provided opportunities for recognition for people like me. So B.C. was a highly accomplished Nigerian curator, art historian. B.C. passed away in 2018, but her legacy and contribution, or 2019 rather, her legacy and her contributions to the art world continue to be celebrated. She founded the Center for Contemporary Art, CCA, in Lagos in 2007, which quickly became a significant hub for contemporary art in Nigeria and Africa. BC's curated numerous exhibitions and art projects, both in Nigeria and internationally. Her curatorial work often explored themes related to contemporary African art, identity, politics, and social issues. Her efforts helped bring attention to emerging and established African artists, contributing to their recognition and success. B.C. Silva was involved in educational initiatives related to art and culture. She conducted workshops, lectures, and discussions to facilitate critical thinking and dialogue within the African art community. B.C. was involved in various international biennales and exhibitions, including the Venice Biennale and Documenta, where she worked as a curator, contributing to the representation of African art and artists on the global stage. B.C. was an advocate for women in the arts and was dedicated to mentoring young artists and curators, nurturing the next generation of talent in the African arts scene. B.C.'s work was instrumental in advancing the visibility and understanding of contemporary Nigerian and African art, and her contributions continue to have a lasting impact on the global art community. I would like to recognize the significant contributions of other distinguished scholars in this domain, including Professor Chika Okeke-Agbolu, who holds the esteemed position of Slade Professor of Fine Art at the University of Oxford. And he has been curator of numerous international exhibitions, including 7 Stories of Africa, which was held at the Whitechapel Art Gallery in 1995 during the Africa 95 Festival. And the Africa 95 Festival was a very significant turning point in African art getting into mainstream venues in UK and thereby globally in the rest of the world. And also recognize Dr. Louisa Egbunike, who curated the thought-provoking Legacies of Biafra exhibition, which was done in a partnership with Nigeria Art Society UK, of which I am president. The initial exhibition was held at Brunei Gallery in 2018, and then subsequently the exhibition toured to a museum in Manchester, and is also slated to travel to Ibaleba House in Bayreuth, Germany. That museum in Manchester is the Gallery Oldham in Manchester. And so alongside the exhibition was a conference which they titled the Legacy of Biafra Conference, which she hosted under her organization, the Igbo Conference, as well as a film which she made in collaboration with Nathan Edward Richards. Next slide, please. The Nigerian artists have been present in UK since shortly after the war. Particularly, the very first one, pioneer, was Uzo Egonu. Egonu was a pioneer of contemporary art practice, Nigerian art practice in the UK. Egonu emigrated to England from Nigeria in 1945 to study art and joining a diaspora of artists from British colonies who worked in England in the decades following World War II. Egonu was a prolific artist. His prolific art career spanned several decades. He was a painter, printmaker, and collage artist, known for his unique style and blended elements of African and European art. His work was exhibited internationally. Much of Egonu's work explored themes of identity, often delving in the personal experiences of an African living in Europe. His art reflected the complexity of cultural identity and migration. Egonu was involved in education. He taught at various institutions, sharing his knowledge and passion for the art with future generations. Uzo Egonu's accomplishments are a testament to his artistic talent, his impact on the representation of African art in the global context, and his exploration of identity and cultural themes throughout his work. So this piece by Egonu, which is called War and Peace, is included in the Legacy of Biafra exhibition. So it's from a private collection in London. His work is found in public collections as well, including at the Tate Museum in London. Next slide, please. So another significant artist of note who I'd like to acknowledge is Sukari Douglas Camp. So her artistic practices include sculpture in welded steel. Sukari Douglas Camp, CBE, is known for these metal sculptures, which have been exhibited and celebrated around the world. Her work has been featured in major exhibitions, galleries, museums, including the Tate Modern in London. Her sculptures often draw inspiration from Nigerian and Kalabari culture. She is renowned for her innovative use of materials, particularly welded steel, often combining traditional themes and motifs with contemporary artistic techniques. Her work often explores themes related to identity, culture, and diaspora. So that's Sukari Douglas Camp, CBE. Next slide. So Nasuk's very own Obi Okigbo is the daughter of Chris Okigbo, the poet who lost his life during the Biafra War. Her work has recently been included also in the Legacy of Biafra exhibition. But beyond that, she was showing in the 50th anniversary exhibition of Pablo Picasso at the Galerie Picasso Paris from the spring of this year right up to the end of August. This is the piece which she showed, which I have the pleasure of seeing hung in my gallery for many months before it went to Paris to this exhibition. So that's Obi Okigbo. Next slide, please. Several artists, like I said, many of us came back to UK, haven't started or trained in Nigeria, came back to continue our practices here. One of such artists who came back to continue our practice here recently is Beju Alatishe. She's currently based in Glasgow and has made significant contributions recently, where she exhibited at Frieze 2022 sculpture show at Regent's Park. Beju's work is internationally recognized. She's also been a curator of the Architecture Biennale at Venice in 2022. Next slide, please. So I've kind of gone backwards and forwards in terms of the way I presented these, but for good reason, as you would find out as I progress. Ben Enwanwu stands as a seminal figure in the evolution of modern art of Nigeria, where his pivotal role in shaping contemporary African art is evident. Serving as an art advisor to the colonial government, he not only contributed to the development of the art, but also played a vital role in nurturing the development of art nurturing the Nigeria's artistic talents, younger Nigerian artistic talents. As an educator, Enwonwu's influence extended to multiple academic institutions, and he left an indelible mark as a lecturer and professor. His legacy includes the founding of the Society of Nigerian Artists, an institution that played a central role in fostering the growth and recognition of Nigerian art. Through teaching and mentorship, he shared his profound knowledge and unwavering passion for the arts, inspiring generations of budding artists. I, for one, had the opportunity of showing alongside him in a salon early in my career. Enwonwu's artistry encompassed both sculpture and painting. He wove traditional African themes and techniques with a discerning modernist sensibility. His iconic portrait of Queen Elizabeth II during her historic visit to Nigeria in 1956 was the first ever sit-in by Her Majesty for an African artist. Next slide. Yinka Shonibare's work explores themes of identity, colonialism, globalization, and cultural hybridity. A 2004 nominee of the coveted Turner Prize, his nomination brought significant attention to his work and solidified his reputation in the art world. His artworks have been exhibited in major galleries and museums worldwide. Shonibare has created numerous large-scale public art installations in various cities, enriching public places with his distinctive sculptures. These installations often engage with themes on colonialism, race, and cultural identity. His commission, next slide please, the Nelson's Ship in a Bottle, which was displayed on the 4th plane in London's Trafalgar Square. This work highlights the historical significance of British naval power and its connection to colonialism. The work was subsequently acquired by the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, London. Yinka Shonibare's art serves as a form of cultural and political commentary. He uses his work to explore complex issues, challenge stereotypes, and provoke critical thinking about issues related to colonial history and globalization. Next slide, please. In 1994, I worked as curator of a gallery in South London. And amongst the art shows I visited, the MA art shows I visited included one in which Chris Ofili's work was featured. Unfortunately, I didn't have the vision at the time to select his work among the list of exhibitions I showed in that year, but that is my claim to fame. So Chris Ofili, OBE, is known for his innovative and provocative artwork, primarily in painting and mixed media. He has received numerous awards and accolades for his contributions to contemporary art, amongst which is the Turner Prize, which he won in 1998. Ofili is known for his innovative use of materials, including his use of elephant dung as a medium in some of his artwork. This unique approach challenged conventional notions of artistic materials and symbolisms. His paintings are characterized by their rich and complex imagery, often featuring vibrant colors, intricate patterns, and layered symbolism. His work explores themes related to race, identity, religion, and cultural hybridity. Most of Ofili's works delve into issues of African and Black diaspora identity. He explores these themes through a combination of African and Western cultural references. His artworks have been widely exhibited. Next slide, please. An ongoing exhibition of his commission commemorating Grenfell Tower disaster is currently installed in Tate Britain. This opened a few days ago. While best known for his paintings, Ofili has also worked in other mediums, including sculpture, printmaking, and watercolor. His diverse artistic range allows him to explore various themes and techniques. His works were included in Echo Ession's in the Black Fantastic exhibition, which was held at Hayward Gallery in 2022, and in David A. Bailey's Life Between Islands at Tate Britain the year before. Next slide, please. I mentioned that Ben Enwonwu was the first African to have a sit-in of the Queen for a sculpture back in 1956. Well, the only other African person, a woman, the very first African woman to have a sit-in for the Queen, and I think the only one was Chinwe Chukwu Roy, who sadly passed in 2012. Next slide, please. So Chinwe executed significant pieces like Migrants No Entry, which is included in the ongoing Legacies of Biafra touring exhibition curated by Dr. Louisa Egbunike. Chinwe relocated to the UK after the Nigeria Civil War. Her lived experience during the war forms the thematic context of the significant part of her practice, as well as Igbo and British cultural practices. One of the significant pieces in this genre is No More Wars, which is this piece which shows Chinwe's personal experience, lived experience, of having bombs dropped in her village while she was a child, shortly after which she came to the UK. Next slide, please. Chinwe worked in the UK from the early 1970s until her passing in 2012. The Nigerian Art Society was founded nearly 11 years ago. Several of the artists in the collective have collaborated in different projects over the past 30 years, but formally came together in January 2013. We have held a number of very important exhibitions in the UK, including the Nigerian Centenary exhibition titled Nigeria at 100, Transforming the British Experiment in 2014, and the aforementioned Legacies of Biafra touring exhibition, which originated at Brunei Gallery and subsequently toured to Gallery Odam in Newcastle and later to tour to Iwaleva House in Bayreuth in Germany. As the president of Nigerian Art Society UK, I have the pleasure of showing my work first among this collective of artists. Please, previous slide. Yes, please. So this is one of my pieces. It's titled Deep Blue Sea. Like I say, my work engages with the theme of colonialism, slavery, and the dystopia and the events of, that have manifested from those historical epochs. This piece is an abstract. It's made entirely in recycled material, mostly from breakfast cereal boxes, which I collect in my house, predominantly. And then also there's a whole host of other materials, which I term essential commodities. And essential commodities is a global term for those goods typically made by Tate & Lyle, Nestle, and other sort of colonial era conglomerates who operated in Nigeria before independence. And so the whole idea of essential commodities in imported consumer items is the basis of the non-production or very low production of our own staples today in Nigeria and our dependence on imports. Next slide, please. I titled this piece Congo. This piece is actually an installation, but it's difficult to show an installation in this photograph. So this piece is 8.5 foot high in the round, actually, it's diameter. And in front of it is a Maxim gun. And so a Maxim gun built with the wheels of bicycles, which I salvaged, as well as paper and sort of various pieces of scrap material. The Maxim gun is pointed straight at the painting, and on the floor is some tires without the bicycle, without the wheel. And then in between, in the middle of the tires, is a skull, a human skull, and a chopped off hand. And this piece looks at the partitioning of Africa from how the scramble was initiated by King Leopold's advance into the Congo because the bicycle had been invented and somehow they couldn't really go very far with wooden or metal wheels. They needed rubber for the wheels for the bicycle to go at its speed. The essence of the wheel in the composition is also talk about industrialization and how Africa has become the industrial dumping ground and in fact even the source of European industrialization through being the source of the materials for which industrialization, in fact even the Enlightenment, was based. Next slide, please. So this piece is by Ade Ogundimu, who is a member of the group. He calls this One Rose. His work is using his recreated. By the way, Ade Ogundimu is on my course on the doctorate in fine art at this very university, University of East London. We're both in the final year. And so he's used traditional Nigerian symbology of uli and CBD and some other self-created symbols and iconography to create this piece, which is quite huge. It's about 10 foot across by 6.5, 7 foot high. So it's quite a significant piece. It's got a sculpture, which is installed, a carving, which is installed in the middle of the strips of wood, which he calls a technique called Shu Sugiban. And next slide, please. And another piece by Ade Ogundimu, which is included in Legacies of Biafra exhibition, and which critiques, it talks about the war, but also critiques it from perspective of Britain's involvement in the war. So up there, there's a dove holding in its mouth is an olive branch, but also in its claws, on its talons, there is the British map, or the British flag rather. And you can see the dense, dark, ominous sort of scenery with fires and commotion, pandemonium. He's looking at colonialism as a source and a cause of the numerous wars that are still ongoing in Africa. Next slide, please. This piece is by Alex Badebo. It's in a printmaking technique. It's in woodcut, and he's made it. Alex works in London. He's made his source is derived from traditional Nigerian cultures and practices of fishing with calabashes and people standing in the water to catch their fish, such as you'd find in Arugungu. Next slide, please. And this is by my friend, the Vice President of Nigerian Society, my brother, Chike Azonye. And this, again, is a piece of his which was included in the Legacy of Biafra exhibitions, looking at the events and the outcomes of the war in terms of the tribalism, the whole three-tribe system, which is on the top right of the painting, the victims of war, malnourished children, as well as graves there in a brief sort of, and then of course there's NCBD sign up at the top left of the painting. Next slide, please. Another piece by Chike. Chike's work is very symbolic and almost cubist. Next slide, please. And this piece is by Dotun Adigbite, one of our members, and this is made in wood. It's a wood collage, so it's cut pieces of wood. The reason why I'm showing you this full range of art expressions is to show you that there is so much innovation and contribution to British art coming from Nigeria to Britain. This is our contribution. Next slide, please. So this is a sculpture by Emmanuel Okoro. It's almost a relief, a freestanding relief sculpture in the sense that it's only a two-sided piece. Next slide, please. And the painting in very thick impasto paint, applied directly with a palette knife from Benga Orimoloye. Next slide, please. Another thick impasto painting from Imoisi Imonige, done in oil. Next slide, please. This Kunle Adegboye is an award-winning printmaker. He graduated. He did his master's degree. He had his early art education at Yabatech in Lagos, and he did a master's degree in Goldsmiths College, where he won pretty much all the awards, basically, in his very new, innovative style of a photographic printing technique, on top of which he then applies paint work. So he's a painter printmaker. Next slide, please. This piece is by Lara Ige-Jacks. The landscape, the very rural landscape, which is based in the Uluma Rocks in Ogun State, which is where she hails from. So just a piece of nostalgia, if you like. Many of our artists make work that reference the lived experiences in Nigeria, their personal lived experiences. Next slide, please. And this is by Mike Echekoba, and this piece is titled Jakpa, which I think in Yoruba means to exit. And so he's looking at, you know, current affairs, issues brought about by events ongoing in Nigeria. And those events ongoing in Nigeria, which have been ongoing for the last, since Babangida, or maybe before, is the reason for a huge loss of the skilled people from Nigeria to the UK. But not a loss to Nigeria, because we then sort of connect back to Nigeria regularly. I myself am a member of art collectives in Nigeria as well. I'm a member of the Guild of Professional Fine Artists in Nigeria. I'm a member of Nigerian Art Society in Lagos. Next slide, please. This is a ceramic piece, again with a lot of uli and CBD, again by Anthony Indikamu, who studied under El Anatsui. And these pieces made in ceramics actually woven with wires. So they're very small tiles. He has printed on each one of them. This is a huge piece, right? It's really large, very heavy. And he then sort of printed on them, glazed them, fired them, and then wove them together. Nobody in Britain, in British art, was doing anything like this before we came. Next slide, please. Another piece by Anthony Ndekawu, again using the concept of uli and CBD. Next slide, please.
This another piece by Obi Okigbo, similar in terms of its style and sort of thematic approach to the piece that she showed in the Museum Picasso Paris. Next slide, please. And this is by Raymond Soko. Again, a significantly unusual painting. It's done on plywood, and he's chopped out, he's scored out, he's burnt up, he's etched on it, he's painted on it, he's done so many things. He's treated this wood to the extent that it's totally unrecognizable as wood. He's used this material so masterfully that anybody who beholds this wonders, how did you learn to do this? He learned it from Nigeria at the time when paints and brushes were embargoed as a result of essential commodities era and the austerity measures where art materials were embargoed. I went to university with him at the same time, and that's how I started to make collage myself, because we couldn't get paints. You couldn't import them. Next slide, please. Another piece by Ray Soko, which is made recently. So it's using all sorts of any kind of pigment that he can find, used on wood, which is burnt out, which is chopped up, which is scored, which is engraved, etched, and different textural elements, added to the, so it's added as well as subtracted from the surface. Next slide, please. And this one is a hyper-realistic painting by Titus Agbara. And Titus Agbara's work is significant and well-renowned in the UK. His work has featured in at least 5 episodes of Britain's Greatest Landscape Painter, and he has reached the final at least 3 times. He's also made the mark as British greatest portrait painter. Titus Agbara is a realist. He paints exactly what he sees, but the unique thing about Titus Agbara, which many people find awe-inspiring, is that Titus Agbara makes his work only with the palette knife. He doesn't use a paint brush. He makes it with a piece of metal, a little knife, and that's how he applies his paint delicately, and he works extremely fast. His output rate is phenomenal. Next slide, please. There's a flower vase by Tunde Akineronye. This vase is from the ground up. It's probably about 4 foot high off the ground. It's not thrown on a wheel. It's actually coiled and is made by hand. It's a significant piece of work. Tunde is inspired by a phenomenal Nigerian ceramist called Ladi Kwali. Next slide, please. So a few artists have come recently to London, as I said, to settle, to continue to produce their work. And notable amongst these is the son of Ben Enwawu. His name is Oliver Enwawu. He's only recently emigrated to Nigeria, having run his gallery and his studio in Lagos for many years. So Oliver's evocative figurative paintings, capturing subjects engaged in dance, masquerading, or imbued with mythological symbolisms, carry forward a tradition reminiscent of his father, Ben Enwawu, artistic legacy. Next slide, please. So that's a portrait. And as you know, if you're familiar with the work of Ben Enwawu, portraiture is a very significant part of his practice. And his portrait is very reminiscent of a Ben Enwawu's petrol, which was recently sold in London for £2 million. Next slide, please. Nigeria Art Society UK is associated with so many other artists who are working in England today. One of those who has had a very extensive practice, has been based and working in England for over 40 years, is Ademola Akintola. His art centers Yoruba's folklore and traditions of dance and festivity. Next slide, please. Emmanuel Jegede is the reason why I came to UK to work as an artist. So in 1988, I had 2 exhibitions going on concurrently, one at the National Gallery of Art and one at the National Museum. And Emmanuel came on holiday to Nigeria. He was simply stunned at my way I was doing so many things and always in the media and on television, in newspapers and all that. And he wanted to have an exhibition with me in London at the Westbourne Gallery in West London. So he invited me over, and that's how I came. So I came to do a show. I left my gallery unattended for 5 years, and eventually realized that Nigeria had changed much too much for me to go back to resettle there. And besides, my girlfriend had come to join me at the time, and she'd found work while I was working as an artist. So we got married, and So, yeah, so Emmanuel Jegede's work. Emmanuel worked in the UK from the 1980s until he relocated to Nigeria a few years ago. His son, Tunde Jegede, is a celebrated kora player and recent director of the Museum Center in Lagos. Emmanuel and I were involved in perhaps the biggest British exhibition to have occurred up to now in the United States of America. And the exhibition is titled Transforming the Crown, African, Asian, and Caribbean Artists in Britain from 1960 to 1996 at the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Bronx Museum, and the Caribbean Cultural Center in Manhattan. And, the next slide, please. So, a number of artists who have come recently include Ndidi Emefiele, whose stylized figurative work is highly regarded. Next slide, please. Joseph Ijoyemi, a younger artist, who is included in the ongoing Bloomberg's New Contemporaries Art Exhibition and has recently curated a show in conversation with the collection of the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, London. Next slide, please. And of course, the prolific Helena Foster, who is a regular on London's exhibition scene. Next slide, please. And this is Josephine Obo McLeod, is a member of Nigerian Society UK, so it should have been shown earlier on. Her practice is a printmaking technique using photographic printmaking, and her work is simply phenomenal. Next slide, please. Joy Labinjo is a young artist born in 1998, and she's got a show which opens, so an inaugural show at the new Tiwani Gallery, which opens on Monday. That's next week, Monday. Next slide, please. So, one of the other artists who painted the Queen, but not from a sit-in, he painted from a photograph recently for the platinum, no, what was it? The Diamond Jubilee, just before the Queen passed, is Uluwale Omofemi. He was commissioned by Tatler magazine. Next slide, please. So these are shots from the Legacy of Biafra exhibition, just to give you an idea, because it's a significant exhibition which will distribute information through Alex when it next comes to London. Next slide, please. The piece there is my painting, the one in the big red one, and the one to the right is Chike's painting I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. This is an installation by Obi Okigbo, which has her father's poetry in a display case. Next slide, please. This is a theater, the launch in the theater of the exhibition, where the keynote was Ben Okri, and a few other people presented at the opening of the exhibition. Next slide, please. And this is in my gallery, where I currently and constantly have the work by Nigerian Art Society UK members on display. The gallery is open by appointment, so if you want to see some of the work, by all means grab me and I'll give you my card. Next slide, please. Okay, so worthy of mention are the numerous collaborative projects between Nigerian-based artists and their counterparts across the Atlantic. The spotlight shines on galleries that frequently grace London's art scene, such as Sandra Obiago's SMO Contemporary, and the Nigerian-owned galleries like Tafeta and T1, which I mentioned earlier, who opened their shiny new gallery on Cork Street on Monday. I wish to acknowledge activists and other stakeholders like Onyeka Chiwambu, whose tireless efforts are leading the return of looted treasuries from colonial era. Additionally, I wish to mention talents in the art world and performing arts, in the wider art of performing arts, talents like Ion the First, who captivated audiences, including King Charles III, on multiple occasions. From theater to stage, film, and other art forms. And in fact, for film, there are numerous Nigerian movies on Netflix, Amazon, and other television platforms. Nigerian music is a mainstream component of British music, with record-breaking download statistics on music streaming platforms like Spotify, Apple, or Amazon Music. Live performances that are always sold out in the biggest UK venues, and Nigerian literature, indeed, also widely and highly regarded. Nigerian artists have made indelible marks in the rich tapestry of British art. Visual artists like Yinka Shonibare, CBE, Turner Prize winner Chris Ofila, Chike Azonye, and many others, too many to list, have left an enduring legacy on British culture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hassan, for you. We have some time for some questions, so we're running late for lunch, but we started late, so we'll soon break. Any questions? Thank you. Someone's bringing you a microphone.
Hassan, thank you very much. That was really wonderful showcase of Nigerian art, which I'm a fan of. I'm not an expert, but I do love to look at the art and appreciate the talent and the skills and so on. Recently I went, and I like the different models that you've shown there, different ways of working, different resources. Recently I went to a session looking at use of egg tempura, and that was really interesting. But what I want to actually say is the effect of artwork on individuals, and in particular on the young generation, because I think it's something that is very therapeutic. Personally, for the artist, I could see the passion in your voice when you were showcasing all the artwork, yours and others. I really think we should encourage young people to take pride in artwork. It's personally therapeutic, both for the bright ones and the not so bright individuals, because it's about artistic expression. But also I'm thinking long term, because I happen to be acquainted with some people who work with archives and museums and selling art, and I know it's an area where Nigerians and Africans don't feature a lot in. But you mentioned one of the art being sold for 2 million, and it can be very lucrative, and I'm not just thinking money, I'm just thinking about showcasing the talent that Nigeria has and being able to impart that knowledge to young people and what the potential areas of work can be. So that is my feeling and thought about that. But I also wanted to know some of those artists you mentioned, if they're doing any work with young people to try and encourage their interest and not just be about sport and music or whatever. Thank you.
Very good question, and my response is that for most, in fact all the exhibitions I've ever done, we always have a program of workshops that go with the exhibition. We try to make sure that the people who are traditionally the least likely to attend art exhibitions, we are able to include them in various strategies for developing new audiences. Children, by their nature, naturally are artists, and art is one of the very few subjects that is mandatory in early years education. The first thing you have, when Nigeria stopped importing paints and materials for artists to practice their professions or to study within universities, UNESCO gave grants of art materials for early years education. And many of those materials found their way, or could either have been the surplus, or maybe some smart businessman just took them to market anyway. And we were able to still buy those materials and manufacture our own paints with them. But generally speaking, children have access. A child will draw on your car. A child will draw on your bed sheet if you don't give them paper to draw on. A child will take your prized photograph and draw on it because they can't resist it. It's just a natural, instinctive thing. And the drawing and the making art helps them to develop. It helps their developmental processes. That's the reason why art is mandatory in schools. But we support programs where schools, Chiki and I, we've worked in over 200 schools in this country in the 30-something odd years since we've been working here. And in all our exhibitions we have, even during COVID, when we had an exhibition, we did an online workshop with schools. So they were at home and they were following, through video and that kind of interaction. Yesterday, I lectured in a school, and I was telling them exactly what I'm saying now and how relevant. So people really trying to consider whether art is a viable career for them to take up. Thank you.
There's another question from the back.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. It's not really, I'm not going to ask a question, I'm just throwing things out there. I didn't have the chance at school to study art. I was thrown out of the class, but I was very artistic. And I grew up mainly in rural England. It took me, oh my God, like almost 50 years to reconnect with my art. And I did that as part of my recovery. I'd always been in galleries. I used to take my children from time to time, but mainly it was for me in terms of my recovery. So where I am today, you know, still love art, still love African art, feel it's very linked to my spirituality also. But also I have a son who is 23, just turned, and he has got complex needs. And we've seen how art in the schools has really inspired our children with extra different needs. And you're just looking around nowadays, and I'm thinking of all the art that's very, what do they call it? It's the new kind of thing they're bringing out with all the white artists, and it's very sensory. So I'm just thinking of African art on that stage as well, should be center stage. And again, I just want to thank you, because it really helped me today to realize that, you know, recovery is very important and art is very important to a lot of people in recovery. So thank you from my heart.
Thank you. And just to add to that, all public galleries in the UK and in London have programs, educational programs, that are free for children to attend. They actually try to get black people to bring their children. They're even there on Saturdays and Sundays. Just go online, look at the Tate, look at the Hayward, and look at the major galleries in London. They all have those programs. And that's an excellent way to engage your children. And the materials are free for them to use. They get to meet notable artists every weekend. All you have to do is take them there. It's free. So these resources are available for you to explore. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we take the last question? Oh, yes. Sorry, she did have her hand up first.
Thank you so much for that. Very commendable, the work you're doing with the schools in the UK. My question is for Nigeria. What are we doing in getting people to go to schools to talk to them? Because I referenced this. I schooled in Nigeria, there was one here. We had a choice. You had to make a choice because you had so many subjects, art or science. I was forced to go into science because our parents kind of engineer, doctor, lawyer, whatever. I ended up doing engineering. But during COVID, like the lady said about art being therapeutic, luckily I had bought loads of art supplies. I had so many paintings, about 20. Self-taught, picked up a few things because it was innate. My art teacher saw this in me when I was at school, and I turned down art and went for science, and pleaded with me to stick with art, but I didn't. I went with what my parents would be happy with. I've had 2 exhibitions for my art. It's not something I studied for. So if we can go to the schools in Nigeria, it's commendable we're doing it here, but what can we do in Nigeria to get people to appreciate, connect with, whichever medium is possible? That would be good to have.
Well, okay, I don't know if I mentioned that in my childhood I was sort of taken to Nigeria because my parents couldn't keep us here. We were evicted from our home. My father didn't come back to Nigeria until 1976, and then he died in 1983. But before he died, around about the time before, 2 years before he died, was when I was to go to university. I filled my JAM form to do fine art, and my father said, I'm wasting his money. What am I doing fine art for? I should go and do something. He was a lawyer. So I filled another form to do political science at the University of Benin. But I did the exam for Ahmadu Bello University and I passed. So I got admitted in Ahmadu Bello University as well as University of Benin. So I went to ABU, and throughout that year my father got he refused to talk to me. So halfway through the year, I got so confused, I left ABU and I went to University of Benin to register to do political science. But as soon as I got to University of Benin, they had the first ASU strike, Association of Academic Staff Union of University strike. And it went on for 6 months. So during the ASU strike, my father said, oh no, you can't stay at home doing nothing. Go and do something. So I went and I did A-level, external A-level, reading politics, economics, and fine art on my own. And I made the best result in Kaduna State in 1982. So I had the option of doing something else but fine art. And then it occurred to me, look, I can't go to UniBen and I'm not going through to go to the JAM process anymore. So I reapplied to go into ABU again.
I went into ABU. At this point in time, my father was ill and in hospital in Queen Mary's in London for most of that time. He came back to Nigeria and realized I was going back to ABU to study fine, and he was really angry, saying he's not letting me waste his money. He's had enough. And then he died in '83. And when he died, it was the only opportunity I ever had to study fine art. So if I hadn't lost my father, you probably have Chiki standing here today giving this delivery to you than me. I'll be talking about science in Nigeria. So, but I understand where it comes from, because in the era right after Nigeria's independence, the erstwhile white-collar jobs in the professions of engineering, medicine, architecture, and all that had more respectability than fine art. Also, my father's concern was that there wasn't a market, so how could I make a living from being an artist? But I proved him wrong, because in 1986, I was a very comfortable, well-established artist running my studio in Lagos. There are many artists working in Nigeria, very, very, very many. Nigeria churns out not just musicians and Nollywood stars, Nigeria churns out a phenomenal number of artists every year. There's so many Nigerian institutions that offer art. Many of those artists work with children in their studios. They pass these skills on. Now, being an artist in Nigeria is a highly respectable profession, and it's regarded by children as well.
I'd like to take the last question from Peter Badejo, OBE.
Yeah, just to add to your point, Hassan, I just got back from Nigeria last night, and a new Iwalewa gallery has been opened in Lekki.
That's right.
It is the second largest gallery in Lagos now. Right. And in terms of fare, there are two Nigerians, the privileged Nigerians and the less privileged Nigerians. But the art movement is helping now to bridge that gap. Because a lot of children, they are working with children in less privileged areas like Agege, Surulere, and all that. The movement is very strong, and good artists are coming out of it. The galleries are developing. And then one opportunity that is coming up now is Nigerians are beginning to buy works of art.
Yes, very true.
It is very, very important. Otherwise, the next two generations might be fighting to get works like yours and others to Nigeria. But when Nigerians buy them, we will see it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just to add to that. So Yemisi Shillon is one of the biggest art collectors in the world, not just in Nigeria, in the world. And he's recently dedicated a museum called the Shillon Museum in Lekki. And in his museum, artists are contributing work, donating work, or pledging work, to endowing work to the museum's collection. And it's right in the Pan-African University premises. So there's a lot of educational connections to that collection that's ongoing at the moment. And yes, so there's huge Nigeria. I take work to Nigeria all the time. I only fly with a painting. I don't take any luggage or anything. I take work to Nigeria, drop it off, and jump in the next plane back to London. So there's huge collection in Nigeria, but there's huge collection of Nigerian art in London. There's the art fair, which we're in the art fair season. So from next week, there is going to be at least 10 Nigerians who you probably never heard of before, showing work in British galleries, from 154, which is at Somerset House in central London, to Freeze, which shows in Regent's Park, and then many other private galleries, commercial galleries in central London, all showing Nigerian art. So Nigerian art is a big, big aspect of British art scene, and it's only going to grow even bigger, as Nigerian music is, and Nigerian food, by the way.
Thank you. Can we have a round of applause? So just before we go to break, we're going to take a quiz question, and I hear there's a prize for whoever wins the quiz. We're going to take questions throughout the day, so the first one is going to come up on the screen. And the question is, who is this British Nigerian? Who said Gatwick? Hey!
No, that's not she.
Adebayo Ogunlesi. Ogunlesi, who is called Gatwick. Who is called Gatwick because his company bought a large portion of the Gatwick airport and bought City airport. We'll take one more. And who is this British Nigerian? Michael Shitu, the mayor of Southwark. And if you go to the microsite for this conference, we have the biographies of these people. Oh, I shouldn't have told you that because we have a few more. Don't go to the microsite. Have you taken it off? Right. So thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed the first part of this conference. There's going to be lunch in the room opposite. If you want to use the restrooms, please turn right and left. The restrooms are over there, and lunch is in the opposite room.
There is this conclusion that those who are living in Europe have forgotten our culture. But I'm taken aback. That is not true. You are here promoting the culture of our people, even outside our shore.
From theater to stage, to film, to music, literature, Nigerian artists are household names in the anthology of British art. Yinka Shonibare, who you saw earlier during the quiz, CBE, Turner Prize winning Chris Ofili, Chike Azonie, my colleague in the Nigerian Art Society UK. The list is long.
I always considered both Nigeria and Jamaica to be a home for me, somewhere that I've never lived before, somewhere where I might say quite guiltily, I don't speak the language, I don't speak Yoruba, but I still assimilate with that culture. It feels like home. When I go home, as soon as I step off that plane, I feel comfortable and I love it. Music being a big thing for me. Besides town planning, I am a musician as well. I play a few instruments. I play drums, piano, talking drum as well. And I DJ on the side as well. And music was a huge thing for me growing up. I also attended the Iroko theatre classes as a youth with my sisters.
Unlike those before them, who were largely consigned to the margins of society, the current generation of African people in Britain, of British Nigerians or from other nations, are resolute in staking their place within the heart of
Good
British
afternoon
social.
to everyone. And I'm just going to say, before I get into the meat and drink of this presentation, that it's going to be all singing and dancing. By that I mean it's going to be like in 3 different sort of segments. The first segment will be, well, not formal, but more sort of like presentational in the way that most of the stuff has happened today. But then, after that, I'm going to invite a young friend of mine to come and say something. And then, eventually, there's going to be a slideshow presentation as well, a Hall of Fame slideshow presentation. So just so you know that it's in 3 segments. Okay. So, the theme of my presentation is the legacy of musicians of Nigerian descent in the UK's music ecosystem. It's been known for a long time that Nigeria is the most populous black African nation on earth. The tale I'm going to tell you today will focus on some of the notable contributors to the musical synergy between Nigeria and Britain, but it is by no means exhaustive or all-encompassing, because there are zillions of people everywhere doing stuff, yeah? All I can do is like, well, I guess tell a story that I see from my perspective. Okay. So, can we have the first slide, please? Yes, thank you. My story begins almost 100 years ago. In 1925, Canon J.J. Ransom Kuti was the first Nigerian musician to ever have a record released on Zonophone Records. Kuti composed and sang Christian hymns, and the songs were recorded in London. So Here's a picture of the singing minister of Abeokuta. Abeokuta being the place where the Anglican Church was mainly kind of based back in those days, probably even now, who knows. And he just happens to be the grandfather of Fela Ransom stroke Anikulapo stroke Kuti, and also of Wole Soyinka, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1986. So, can we move on to the next slide, please? In 1934, another Fela, in this case Fela Showande, arrived in the UK from Nigeria to study music. A versatile talent, Showande was a major church organist in London. By that I mean he was the music director in a major cathedral in central London. But he was also a well-known player on like the jazz and pop music scenes, where he accompanied well-known singers such as Adelaide Hall, who'd come from the United States, working with Duke Ellington and others, and also Dame Vera Lynn. Eventually, he became a composer of orchestral music, and in 1944 he composed his best-known piece, the African Suite for Strings. That piece is kind of notable for the last movement in it, which quotes from a well-known Yoruba tune, Oni Dodo, Oni Moi Moi, you know, and so a lot of people here probably recognize that piece of music, which he handled like a fugue at the time. And I think he was probably influenced by the school of composition that was well, spearheaded by Bela Bartok, the Hungarian composer, who was interested in drawing from folk music influences. And these influences kind of spread across from Europe into the United States. So composers such as Vaughan Williams and Benjamin Britten were doing things with folk music from England. And in the States, composers such as Aaron Copland were doing things with American folk music. And Fela Showande did similar things with Nigerian, maybe Yoruba in particular, music and Western classical music, bringing them together to be played by orchestral musicians. Showande also worked for the forerunner of the BBC World Service, the BBC African Service in this case, as a broadcaster. And in some of the broadcasts he made, he spoke about African music, some of the features of African music that would distinguish it from other types of music, and also ways in for people of non-African backgrounds to understand, appreciate, and enjoy music from Africa. And he made those broadcasts not only in English, but also in Yoruba. And I'm fortunate to actually have some of those recordings because we were lucky to meet, well, online, somebody who was a protege of his, based in Kent State University, Ohio, a guy called, well, a fellow called Guy Perinetti. Guy Perinetti had like all this stuff which he kind of passed on to us very kindly. So I've got these recordings of Showande talking about African music and like the Yoruba ones as well. Nowadays, Fela Showande is regarded as the father of Nigerian art music. When I say art music, I'm talking about music of the courts and the temples that some people might describe as classical music. Yes, that's what he was, he's identified with that, even though he also played a lot of popular music. So I have a hypothesis about Fela Showande that his most fertile creative period as a composer was the time he lived in London between, say, well, the 1940s into the 1950s. But after that, he returned to Nigeria. And while he was there, he worked for the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation and did like research as well for one of the universities. I'm not sure if it was Ibadan, but one of them anyway. He had a sad experience because he was commissioned to write a piece of music to mark the independence celebrations of Nigeria in 1960, and he composed a folk symphony. But unfortunately, there wasn't a band to play it in Nigeria, and so the piece was shelved. It wasn't performed at the time, which couldn't have been very pleasant for him to experience. But eventually that piece was like premiered by the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra in the early 1960s. And I think he also got to the point of like conducting it himself with New York Philharmonic Orchestra playing it. On the popular culture side of things, can we move on please to the next slide? Thank you. Ambrose Campbell. And I know Uncle P and I have spoken about this man before. Ambrose Campbell arrived in Britain during the Second World War. A gifted singer and composer, Campbell is widely credited with forming Britain's first ever black band, the West African Rhythm Brothers. Fela Anikulapo Kuti described Campbell as the father of Nigerian modern music. Campbell's band performed at the VE Day celebrations at the end of World War II in 1945 in Trafalgar Square and Piccadilly Circus. To quote him directly about the experience, he said, "We had a huge crowd following us around Piccadilly Circus. You could hardly move." The band had a long residency at a club called the Abalabi Club in Soho's Berwick Street Market, and they also appeared on British television. And Campbell associated with leading British jazz musicians such as Ronnie Scott and Tubby Hayes, and obviously they must have like drawn some influence from what he was doing. Campbell was also immortalized in City of Spades, the first in a trilogy of novels by Colin McInnes that painted a vivid picture of African and Caribbean immigrants in London of the 1950s. The Abalabi Club moved to more upmarket premises in Wardour Street, and Campbell formed a new band to play there. And I have a little story to tell about Ambrose Campbell, because I met him in the early 1980s. In those days, I was a very sort of cantankerous young man, and I was involved in some scrap or argument with someone, anyway. And this man came up to me and was like, you know, trying to soothe me, to placate me, and trying to, well, make me calm down, basically. And he gave me his phone number and said, stay in touch. But I had no idea who he was. And I didn't actually follow through on that. And years later, I was flicking through this address book and realized that now I knew who he was. And I was like, wow, I've got Ambrose Campbell's phone number and I never actually called him. You know, and I felt really kind of sad that I didn't get to know him a lot better and get to learn from him. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. In the 1950s, Ginger Johnson emerged as an influential figure. Well, mention again. Good. All right. That's nice, isn't it? Nice touch. These things you don't plan with them. Anyway, and he was like Edmondo Ross's percussionist in the 1950s. Edmondo Ross was the leader of like the leading Latin American jazz dance band in London of the 1950s. But by the 1960s, Ginger Johnson had diversified into working with leading rock and pop musicians such as Georgie Fame, Elton John, and others. And his band, Ginger Johnson's African Messengers, was a group of drummers who eventually played a major role in providing the backbeat to the sounds of swinging London in the 1960s. So, in this picture here, there's a very, well, exceptionally famous person that we all know of. And this was at the Rolling Stones concert in, I think, probably 1969 in Hyde Park. a few days after the demise of Brian Jones, who was said to have founded the band. And Dennis, is that your dad there right at the front? Yeah. Okay, well, good. Yes, right. So some of his sidemen joined groups like the CBSAP, Ginger Baker's Air Force, and groups like that. And talking about Ginger Baker. Now, Ginger Baker was really sort of a pivotal, important figure in this sort of interface between Nigerian and British music. He was like the drummer of Cream, which was rock's first supergroup, featuring Eric Clapton, Jack Bruce, and him. But because he enjoyed and was attracted to Nigerian music that much, and the drumming in particular, he worked with quite a lot of Nigerian musicians, including Fela Ransom Kuti and the Lijadu sisters. But then he also spent time in Nigeria. This is Ginger Baker now. He went to Nigeria, he built a recording studio, and well, did some, what we call CPD, continuing professional development work as a drummer out there. So while he was there, I think, Paul McCartney was attracted to go to Nigeria too. And he went to that same recording studio, ARC Recording Studio, and started recording Band on the Run, which is probably Wing's best known album. And there's another kind of Beatles-related story here, because there was a guy called Jimmy Scott, who was, his nickname was Obladi Oblada, right? And it seems as if they drew inspiration from his name, or his nickname, to create this song, which was one of the biggest hits they had, the Beatles, just before the tail end